This is a Flying Cow production. Well, hello and welcome. My name is Clay Johnson. I am the Flying Cow himself, and this is a brand new production from the Flying Cow that we are calling the Academy. The basic idea is that we take a random year, we pick the quote-unquote best films of that year, watch them, we talk about them, and eventually we will decide what we think should have been named Best Picture, again in quotes, of that year. Like I said, my name is Clay Johnson, but I am not doing this alone. I have here with me two guests that you might recognize if you've ever listened to any of my other podcasts or seen anything else that I've ever done. Starting off with Hannah Keefer, who is a bit of a film enthusiast in her own right. I'll let her tell a little bit more about herself.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm Hannah. I've done some of the trivia matches with Clay and been involved in most of your podcasts in one way or another.
Yes, true.
Yeah, I'm a huge film nerd, and right now I'm actually nearing the end of a project to watch 100 movies from the year 1994. So this is an interesting way to connect into this. I'm into the 70s now, yeah, comparing what was up for Best Picture to everything else has been a ride.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, we also have here with us on this ride, Jack Allison, who also knows and enjoys film quite a bit, but he definitely has his own slant on things. So, Jack, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've seen well, first of all, welcome. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. I've seen about 14 movies, and I'm pretty stoked to be talking about them, or at least a couple of them tonight. Real quick question, unrelated. Have you guys ever taken a dump so intense that you have to take your shirt off midway through?
I don't know if that's something I want to talk about here.
Okay, I'll be in the bonus episode.
All right. Well, like I said, thank you guys for joining me for this. This is actually the idea for this project has been kicking around for quite a while. We have attempted it once or twice, but this time we definitely are doing it in a bit more of a bite-size idea. So, like I said at the top, basically we are taking a random year. I chose 1994 partially because Hannah was doing her film watch, but also I thought a year from the 90s would be a good place to start. A lot of people, especially, our age that are kind of the ones kind of leading things at the moment, remember the 90s quite a bit. And so I thought it would be a good place to start our kind of discussion. And I mean, I'm just going to start this off by saying that, I mean, while, we definitely, we're going to talk about these films, we're going to talk about like what we liked, what we would have chosen had we been in the, the quote unquote, the Academy at that time. This is kind of the whole point of this podcast is that picking a best picture it's impossible. You can't really do it because it depends so much on perspective and what people take into it and things like that. So we are starting off today with the 5 films that were nominated for the best picture awards at the Oscars for 1994. So those 5 films, if you don't have that knowledge off the top of your head, are Quiz Show, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Pulp Fiction, The Shawshank Redemption, and Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump was actually the film that won that year. So we're going to start this kind of discussion off with these films. And at the end, we're going to give you our ideas of what we would have voted for during that time. And we'll give you kind of a brief glimpse of some of the films that we might be talking about in the future. The idea of this, we have watched 15 films, or we will be watching 15 films, and we're going to talk about 5 each episode, and then we're going to have a 4th episode where we have kind of our big awards ceremony, and we're going to decide what we would have chosen as the best film of 1994. But like I said, today we are going to go ahead and we're going to start off with these 5 films that were nominated for Best Picture. And we're starting off our discussion with this first film, Quiz Show.
In 1957, America's favorite program was a quiz show.
You have 21. I'd like you to meet next week's challenger, Charles Van Doren.
But the game was fixed.
You lose when I tell you to lose.
That little box in your living room is plugged into something crooked.
Hollywood Pictures presents
Charles Van Doren hails from one of the most prominent intellectual families in this country.
the story of a man who lived in his father's shadow
Why would a guy like that want to be on a quiz show?
Well, he's not going to be on the cover of Time as Mark Van Doren's son.
until television made him a national hero.
$20,000.
But he never realized
You heard that. There's this congressional committee.
how far
I think you'd be glad of the chance to clear your name.
I can't.
he could fall.
Can't tell them the truth. Why on earth not?
From Academy Award-winning director Robert Redford.
You telling me everybody got the answers but you?
Quiz Show, rated PG-13. Now playing in select cities.
So we are going to talk about Quiz Show. Quiz Show obviously was released in 1994, as all of these films were. It was directed by Robert Redford, and it starred John Turturro, Rob Morrow, Ray Fiennes, David Paymer, Paul Schofield, and several others. So, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but of the ones on this list, this was okay. So of the 5 films, I knew 3 extremely well. I had seen one once, and I had not seen the other one at all. I don't know about you guys. What was
Same
your
breakdown
experience
for me.
going in? About the
breakdown
same?
for me. Yeah, I'd seen 3 many times. I'd seen one once ages ago, and then one never.
Yeah.
I had seen all of them once.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
rewatched them for this because I
Nice.
think the most recently Quiz Show was the one that I'd watched most recently before that, and that was a
Sure.
good 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, I mean, this Quiz Show was for me the one that I'd only seen once, and I feel like I had conflated it with another film that was similar-ish because I kept expecting I can't even tell you what the film was, but I kept expecting certain things to happen that didn't happen. And but I will say, so this film is based on a true story. It was the 21 quiz show scandals of the 1950s, and they use real life people. Charles Van Doren was a real person. Herb Stempel was a real person. These were real people that took part in this conspiracy. And I don't know, like, something about this, and I mean, I think a big part of it is, I mean, we're going to talk as we go through. I started to realize that, some of my favorite performances in these films were not the ones that were nominated for best actor or best supporting actor or anything like that. I thought that Ray Fiennes in this film was amazing. Like he caught me from moment one. Like, I mean, I could totally understand, the people who ran this quiz show being mesmerized by him and wanting him to be a part of their show, because there was something about his performance that just got me from the first moment. And he was not nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Paul Scofield, who plays his father, was, but he was not. And I thought it was a real missed opportunity. I will say, obviously, John Turturro is also in this film playing a real life, quiz character, but they definitely make him more of the comedic character. In fact, as I was reading about this film, that was something that Stempel didn't like, was the fact that they played his character for laughs. And he was like, look, I might be a schlub, but I'm not an idiot. I definitely felt like I enjoyed Turturro's performance, but I definitely felt like it was a little over the top. And there's a scene in this, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but one of the scenes where the protagonist in this film, of course, the protagonist in this film is played by the person that people know the least, Rob Morrow, who at the time was, had, I think, just recently come off of a big television show. He was part of Northern Exposure, had been on that for years and years. And I think this was him attempting to, start a film career. I don't really think it took off. I think he's gone more into like behind the scenes
never
stuff.
Seen again.
Yeah, well, but I will say there was a scene, a confrontation scene between him and Ralph Fiennes that honestly was one of my favorite scenes of any of these films. But yeah, I mean, I definitely liked, while, like I said, I'd seen it before, there was a lot of stuff I didn't remember. And I felt like this film did a really good job of, while definitely there were some things that I was like, how is that a reveal? He literally said that at the beginning of the movie. But other things I thought that they actually revealed pretty well. And so I was really kind of wrapped up in kind of the, kind of the unraveling, not necessarily mystery, but there's more to this story. There's more to this story kind of thing. And the way that things just keep unraveling. I actually really enjoyed it. What did you guys think?
When I first watched this, I was like, again, 5 or 6 years ago, this was one that I was really excited to see. It was something that I was all hyped for. I loved the actors involved. And then when it was finished, and I had no emotional response to it whatsoever. It wasn't even a negative one. It wasn't, but it just immediately vanished from my mind. And so I was rewatching it this time. I was like, okay, so let's see. I can get into it this time. I can, see what this is. And again, it just leaves no impact on me. And I think I've been trying to process through why it doesn't affect me in any way. Like why because I think the pieces of it are all good. I think the pieces of most of these movies are pretty good.
Sure.
But the pieces of this one especially are, these are great people involved with this. And I don't know if it's that when you mentioned that that Rob Morrow plays the protagonist, that unlocked something for me a little bit, because I was like, I'm not sure he is the protagonist. Because I assumed Van Doren, played by Ralph Fiennes, was the protagonist, because he's the one who has like a character arc. He's the one who has a decision to make. The other guy's just kind of following through.
Sure. I mean,
and so maybe that's it. Maybe it's that I couldn't find a protagonist to connect with, and kind of chose one. And
I feel like I think the reason I thought of Morrow as the protagonist is that he's the one that brings us into this story. While the story is not about him at all, he's the one that kind of guides us through the story, which, I mean, I feel like, if anyone in this film was going to be nominated for Best Actor, he would have been the one to fit that bill. Not because of his performance, but because of where he is in in the narrative, the purpose that he plays in the film.
But we almost always know more than him. Like, we know the answers way before he does.
Sure, but he definitely is the audience surrogate. I just felt like we spent the most time with him, so that's, to me, why I felt like he was the protagonist. But
I'm gonna say Hannah hits the nail on the head for my issue with it too. I thought this movie was very meh. And again, it's because I felt a very big disconnect as far as the main characters. I didn't really feel like I had much connection to anybody, and I think the film makes a genuine attempt at having a different protagonist through each act of the film, because the first one you have Simple, the second act you have the Ray Fiennes character, and then you end with the Rob Morrow, Seymour, and Focus, each respectively. The problem with it is that I don't think there's enough transition for you to really be prepared for it. So you're just kind of transitioning with the story in the series of events without really realizing that you're just being torn away from the person that you really just spent the past segment of the film growing connected to, and without being able to follow through with how they culminate.
Well, and like when you think about it, like it's Van Doren who gets the big dramatic moment at the end. He has his long monologue where he confesses, and then shortly after that, or right around that time, is the moment where I cannot remember Rob Morrow's character's name. I just remember the actor now. But where he says something like, somebody says, "Congratulations, you're going to bring him down." He says, "Well, I wanted to bring down TV, and I'm bringing down just this, one
just
thing."
This guy.
And I had completely forgotten that was even part of his story.
Right.
I was like, oh, was that the story you were trying to tell? Because I forgot about it because we were so focused on, so I think that maybe where the disconnect comes in for me is that I feel like it's trying to tell one story, but then another one keeps overshadowing it. And I couldn't pull them apart enough to care about either one. And so I think that's probably something that would be very easy to look past and very easy to really get sucked into one. But if that conflict is there, if that tension is there between the two, I think you're right that it switches protagonists a couple times, and I couldn't hop on board with any of them because I didn't feel like any of them really followed through as much as I wanted them to.
And I think it affects. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I totally see where you guys are coming from. I think that the reason that I enjoyed it so much is because I did get wrapped up in Ray Fiennes, and honestly, the odd relationship that is formed between Ray Fiennes and Rob Morrow's character, because Rob Morrow towards the end is basically trying everything he can to keep Ray Fiennes from getting wrapped up in this, and it ends up happening anyway, which I found an interesting dynamic. Like I said, one of their scenes was one of my favorite moments in the film. So maybe I was just swept up in the Ray Fiennes' performance, which is why I was able to enjoy it as much. But I totally get what you guys are saying. There is a lot of a disconnect. Yeah, they definitely do jump back and forth between protagonists, so it's really kind of hard to say. I think that's why I said it was Rob Morrow, because he's the most consistent character.
I think for me, is in terms of measuring the strengths, kind of piggybacking off of what we've discussed about it so far, is that this is the kind of movie I would recommend to somebody who likes a documentary of a good story, because I think the appeal of the film is very much for me at least, the series of events, the happenings of the circumstance. And again, if you look at the element of TV as a character, great, you get that. But again, like a documentary, you don't really focus on one person unless that's the subject of the documentary, whereas this is more so focusing on the idea of exposing the cheating element with the game shows back then. And again, I think there's a potential fix. They wanted to bridge the character gap that I had with that of the story by perhaps, and this is me personally, cutting the race to was his first name Ray? What doesn't matter. The Stemple role down a little bit. Having that more as a prologue, a precursor to the film, and then having more of a back and forth with the Ray Fiennes and the Rob Morrow character interspersing, because again, it just feels like there's a clear dominance in each act of the film for me, and I think if you can mix them a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's going to be a lot more about Stemple towards the beginning, and then he drops out for a while. And they bring him back, but I think a lot of that is, because of, the nature of the true story. But once again, it's a movie. So if the true story doesn't work, you can always, move things around, to make it work narratively. I don't know like I said, it wasn't necessarily a problem that I noticed while watching it, but as you guys recount it to me, I totally see the issues.
And I think you're totally right that the scenes that really stuck out for me were not so much Ray Fiennes' scenes with Rob Morrow, but his scenes with his father. I found really compelling. Like the contradiction of him trying to measure up to this to his dad academically and artistically, and knowing inside that he's thing. I found those really compelling, and I wanted a similarly compelling thing for Morrow's character. I think if that happened, I think it would have worked better.
Right. Yeah. They tried
was
to build a thing with his wife. And was his wife played by Mira Sorvino? Or am I conflating that with something else? Yeah.
She was.
Okay. Yeah.
Did not recognize her at all.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I will say this was the year before she won Best Supporting Actress for Mighty Aphrodite. But yeah, I think they were trying to build her as like that kind of counterbalance for him, but they didn't do enough with her. So I wonder if they had more scenes with her that just ended up on the cutting room floor. But yeah, no, honestly, I mean, like I said, I loved those scenes with Morrow, but the relationship that really sold his character to me was the one with his dad, which is why I think Paul Scofield was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, because those scenes are great too. And honestly, that relationship, I think, is really what sold the story itself to me, because I totally bought that his whole reason for not being willing to come clean is that he didn't want to disappoint his dad.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was so, which is again, I think why I view him as the protagonist. He had a clear goal. And I think if Morrow
the movie is more about him, but it doesn't follow him enough. He feels like a very big supporting character, but he acts like a lead.
When you focus on Rob Morrow's character in the third act, I felt like it treated Ray Fiennes' character at that point more like the antagonist.
Okay. Because
I had a negative reaction to him. I was rooting against him at that point in the film. I wasn't pulling for him by that point.
Sure.
Now, granted, I did love the relationship he had with his father, and I think that Scofield's performance is one of those great performances where it's got the charm and charisma that it keeps you enticed with him, but not in a sense that the character itself is really that much. It doesn't have as much of an arc.
Yeah.
But or even really, I hate to say it, but development. But in this case, his charisma and his performance, while a little bit more limited than perhaps one of the main leads of the film, do make those moments, those scenes with him, a lot more resonant. I agree.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I mean, was there anything else in particular you guys wanted to say about this film before we move on?
Kinda, yeah. So I had like a bit of a game I played with these 5 films for Spectre.
Okay.
I probably should have mentioned this earlier. So
no, it's fine.
I caught it. I decided to do it while watching the first film I watched, which was Four Weddings and a Funeral. But with each film, I decided to have myself a nice drink with inspired by the film whenever I did. Do you want me to go ahead and say them now, or with each film, or do you?
I mean, however you want to do this, it's your thing. I think with each film would probably be fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with this film, I enjoyed Tap Water.
Is that how this film made you feel? Just tap water, just synonymous with
that? Well, 3 reasons. Yeah, tap water. I was thirsty, and I honestly don't remember any drinks that were associated with this film. Each of the other films had something I could connect it to, but this was the one thing where I was like, well, I'm kind of thirsty, and the filter's broken. Yeah.
All right.
It's got enough substance to be useful, but not quite enough for me to be
sure
delicious.
Didn't have any flavoring in it.
Yeah,
but
not as much flavoring as I hoped.
All right, well,
nourishing.
It
it's
seems
healthy.
like
It's good for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it seems I was the one that enjoyed this the most, and I think all of us were a little mixed on this. So let's go ahead and get into our next film, which was Four Weddings and a Funeral.
Good friends.
You look perfect. In fact, you probably are perfect.
Great lovers.
Oh, Friday's gone too far with Eden.
Maybe this.
Bad timing.
So I came after your fiance?
No, you were 32.
Smashing
What the
climax.
fuck?
It's pretty easy. Just say I do whenever anyone asks you a question.
I do.
Hugh Grant, Andy McDowell, Four Weddings and a Funeral. Rated R.
I'm realizing now I probably should have shared these with you guys because you're just hearing the
Just
audio.
hearing.
No, it's fine. Every single word Hugh said in that trailer, it would just sound like.
Well, I mean,
That's
it
the
is
official
Hugh Grant,
acting
yeah.
style.
I was about to say, I'm pretty
His
sure that
official
he
acting
started
technique.
Mumblecore.
So this is Four Weddings and a Funeral. Obviously, like all the rest, came out in '94. It was directed by Mike Newell. It stars Hugh Grant and Andy McDowell primarily, and then supporting cast includes Kristen Scott Thomas, James Fleet, Simon Callow, and John Hannah. Maybe notable is the writer. Richard Curtis was the writer, who's done a lot of other British rom-coms, including Notting Hill and Bridget Jones' Diary and Love Actually. And it follows the adventures of mostly Hugh Grant's character and his circle of friends through four weddings and a funeral, during which he finds love and somebody dies, because that's what a funeral is. And just kind of tracking his relationship with one woman, but also kind of just looking at his romantic interests and life in general. I was underwhelmed with this when I first watched it and was like, maybe it'll hit. Again, most of these were me approaching, being like, I'll like it better this time. I'll get it this time.
Sure.
Especially since Richard Curtis is my favorite rom-com writer. I have absolutely loved just about everything else he's ever written. And this is not doing it for me. It's just of all of his to get a Best Picture nomination, this is not the one. And largely that's because what I think he often excels at so much is really building tremendous chemistry between the characters and really making me just absolutely fall in love with them and want them to be together. And that never happened for this. And I don't know. I don't know if it was the fault of the writing or the fault of the acting. Probably a mix of both, or maybe some directing in there. But just the core element of wanting the two to get together just was never there. And so much of the story was predicated on the fact that they're together while she's with somebody else, and which is always kind of a tough thing to get your audience to root for.
Yeah.
And what I do think worked really well, I liked more than the main story. I liked all the little pieces around it. I liked all the little I liked the funeral scene. I thought that was actually really that worked for me. That was moving for me and hit an emotional core for me in a way that none of the rest of the movie had up until that point. I love all the little side characters and the little side stories, and even the ones that just pop up for a second and then disappear. And I think those are great. And then the main story that it's choosing to latch onto is just so much less interesting, and it's so disappointing.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I will say, I mean, I'm halfway through this and I'm realizing I was like, they really could have just called this movie Watch British People Be British, because that's really what it is. You're just watching British people be very British, and you have to decide whether or not that's enough for you. And I mean, while this wasn't my favorite of the films, I actually enjoyed it. I think part of that was, I think the moment I saw James Fleet basically doing a knockoff Hugo Horton from Vicar of Dibley, I was sold. If you're not familiar with that show, it's a BBC show, stars, what's her name? Jennifer Saunders. Who's the other one?
I don't know. I don't remember. I only remember Saunders.
Jackie Earle Haley.
Yeah, there you go. Give me a second. I'm pull it up. Dawn French. Dawn French is basically a vicar, the lead, I don't know how to say it, but pastor, preacher, clergy. Yes, thank you.
Rabbi.
Yes, for this small town called Dibley. And James Fleet's character is basically, I mean, honestly, this film came out the same year, but a couple months before that show. I feel like they were like, I like him in this. Let's have him play the exact same character in our show. Because he's rich, He's sweet and kind of goofy, but very likable. It's pretty much the exact thing that he's playing here. Aside from him, I really liked Simon Callow in this film. Sorry, I went on a big tangent to a completely
we now
different
know
show.
all about Vicar of Dibley.
Oh,
So what did you
it's a
think about
great
Forward
show.
to the
If you
Funeral?
ever, yeah, it
Which one did
went from
Miyazaki
like
direct?
1994 to 2007, and it still only had like 20 something episodes. You know, British television. But getting back to the movie, honestly, him and Simon Callow were probably my two favorites. I mean, I did like John Hannah, and you know, I liked a lot of the other, but the ones that I latched onto the most were those two. And I will say, I think you're right. I liked the things that were going on, but I wished a lot of it had been much more fleshed out. Like the whole,
I wanted that to be the movie.
Yes. I mean, like the whole thing with Kristen Scott Thomas, I will say, I don't know about you guys, but I was super confused about their relationship because when they were first introduced, I thought they were brother and sister. I don't know why, but I thought they were related. So then later, when they're like, oh, you need to find a man. I already found one. He's just not into me. I was like, okay, that's a phrase.
We're like,
it
where's
sounds
this
like you're talking
going?
about the lead, but I thought he was your brother.
Maybe
No,
that's why. Maybe that's why he doesn't love her back.
Yeah.
because we're related.
But how
There's a whole
much
other issue.
cooler? How much cooler would this movie have been if instead
With
of trying to trace? That was not where I was going, but however you like your stories to be told, I guess.
Hey.
But if instead of trying to follow Hugh Grant throughout, if each wedding and or funeral had focused had highlighted one of these different characters and given them their own little mini story, made a little anthology film, because all of them were interesting enough that you could do that. I think you could get one story's worth out of Hugh Grant and Annie McDowell. I don't think they work stretched out. I think it should be Love Actually style, where it's little mini anthologies throughout.
This would have been like a great mini series instead.
I totally think you're right. Honestly, while I actually enjoyed Hugh Grant in this film, I thought he was very funny. This was really kind of what started his career. This was kind of his big break. But his whole thing with Andy McDowell, well, there were moments I liked. For the most part, it was the weakest part of the movie to me. I mean, I hated that they killed Simon Callow because I was just like, no, we need more of him. He's the best part.
Well, you know what they say: you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the Andy McDowell.
Yeah, Jack was not a fan of this film.
I'm also admittedly, and maybe some people will hate me for this, but I don't like Andy McDowell very much. I don't think she's very charismatic. I've liked her in one film, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, but beyond that, everything else I've found her just to be kind of there. And I don't. Sure. I'm not trying to be mean. I don't find her very charismatic. And I was honestly, I mean, my MVP for this movie was Kristen Scott Thomas, and. Again, if we had, I mean, again, I can totally see the brotherly, sisterly thing you were getting at, Clay. But if we had a story that could have maybe fleshed out that a little bit, I mean, when she told him, I was like, could this be one of those things when there's like it's cliche, but one of those moments where it's like, hey, you realize that the person you're truly destined for has been there all along.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised, aside from where we were obviously leading the whole time, but I also would have welcomed it at that point. I'm like, can we just swerve the entire audience
I will tell you
that?
if when it's revealed at the end that the last wedding is his wedding, I was very worried that he was getting married to Kristen Scott Thomas because I did not want him to leave her for Andy McDowell because her character was too interesting and their story was too interesting. I was like, I don't want to see her hurt like that. For it to be left for her.
Mm-hmm.
I get that.
I mean, I definitely could have used much more of the friends relationship, because while I enjoyed them, I really didn't get like what they were all about, how they like, I wanted a little bit more backstory about them, and because the moments that we got with them being them, like I said, we're watching British people be British people. It's fun. We enjoyed that. Let's see more of that. But instead, we had a subpar, romantic comedy with Andy McDowell. And I mean, I will say I like Andy McDowell a little bit more than Jack. I mean, it's mostly just because I love the movie, but Groundhog Day is one of my all-time favorites. It's not necessarily because of her, but she's in it.
Well, and I'll say, we know for a fact that the problem with the chemistry in this movie is not Hugh Grant, because he was then in 3 more Richard Curtis movies in which his chemistry with his co-stars was impeccable.
Right.
So he was not the issue here.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, because you're not alone on the Andy McDowell hate. Suddenly I can't remember your name, Jack.
I can't either.
But that's something I've heard a lot, honestly. But I will say the film I have seen most recently with her that I actually thought she was pretty good in, Ready or Not. It's like a slasher kind of thing.
Is that the hunting the rich?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
She's in that?
With what's her name? Jeez.
The Australian actor. Yeah, I know who you're talking
about.
Yeah.
The whole thing is she's getting married and they ask to play a game. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Iggy Azalea.
Yes, Iggy Azalea. Yes. Yeah.
Iggy Azalea and Andy McDowell.
Yeah, and it ends up they end up playing hide and seek. And that really means we're gonna kill you. But no, it's a really good movie, and she plays the mother in that, and pretty good.
She is.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel like I don't hate her, but I feel like she's kind of like tofu in that she doesn't really have any flavor at all. Which means that if she has a really well written part, something that's really stellar that gives her a lot without making her dig to work on it, I think she could be great. I think she could inhabit that role and do exactly what's written on the page. But asking her to dig a little more, I don't know that she does that well.
Well, here's what I think is the issue with Andy McDowell. I think she has the same problem that Jude Law has. Is that Jude Law, when he first came out, everybody was like, "Oh, he looks so good. Let's put him as the lead in everything." And then they realized he's really boring as the lead. He needs to, play these more interesting actor characters, and that's when he's going to be more interesting. I think that not necessarily that she has the same character powers as Jude Law, but they were like, "Oh, she's really pretty and has that southern accent. She'll be great in all of these romantic comedies." And it's like, okay, you see her in one, you've pretty much seen what she's going to do, and that's pretty much all people gave her. So I think that's part of it, is that she was put in a box and we got tired of the box.
I mean, to compare to Jude Law, I like Jude Law a little bit more, and I think a lot of the reason for that is more. And again, I'm not trying to be.
I think it's a similar thing, because like I said, she was playing mean and nasty in in this other movie, and I think she did really well with it. I mean, unfortunately, she needed to get older. Get those, evil mom roles.
Well, I mean, that can work to some actors' advantages. Yeah. Honestly, like I've been kind of mad with Hugh Grant. I'm sorry, but like I loved him in Paddington too. So
there you go.
I mean, like there's just some actors like that who I'm hit or miss with, like early on in their career, but like when they start getting more work like that, when they could really start getting more character driven stuff. And I think with Andy McDowell, maybe if she had been the main focus of this story with this particular film, I could have vibed with her more, because we could have gotten more to understand with her. But again, seeing as you're viewing all these characters through the perspective of Hugh Grant's eyes, I just didn't see enough there to why he wants her as much as he does.
There's a little too much manic pixie dream girl going on with her that she doesn't really have, like not
but she doesn't fit that box, is the thing.
In the sense that she is there to serve his purposes.
Right.
And Krista Scott Thomas has more agency than Andy McDowell gets in this movie. Like, despite her going off and marrying this other person, like, we don't get any sense of why she's doing this or what's going on. We have no idea who she is. And we see her at 4 weddings and a funeral. We see 5 different events and we don't know who she is in any of them. And I think that's the issue, is that we don't ever get to know who she is. And so maybe you're right. Maybe if she was more at the center and had been given more of a part rather than just being the romantic foil to him, the person to make him realize that he needed to commit or whatever it was. I think that would have been a very different movie. But
I agree.
And one of the things that I've loved about Richard Curtis is that he writes women who are interesting and who have agency. And I think that's probably partly why I was so disappointed in this, because she's so clearly just there for him.
Well, and because she really doesn't fit in the rest of the movie. She's really a sore thumb that sticks out of everything. And it's not just because she's American. It's not just because of her accent. She is a completely different, that character. It really feels like somebody else wrote that character and he just stuck her in.
And you can make that work in a sense if you're trying to do like a love at first sight, this is completely different from the world I know. You can do that, but you have to integrate them at the end. You have to pull them together and pull them into the world at the end. And she is always just like, she's the center of everything he wants, but she always feels just almost like an afterthought every time.
Yeah.
So as not to turn this whole discussion into like a shitting on Andie MacDowell, I will say one thing I liked about the movie.
Yeah.
I really liked the scene where he is in the church, Hugh Grant's character, and he says, Lord, I'm sorry for using this in your house, or whatever he says. Then he just goes, poggers, poggers, poggers. And I'm like, that's funny. That made me laugh.
All right. Is there anything that anybody wanted to mention about this film before we move on?
No.
No.
What did I drink? This was
what what was your drink?
Movie. This was what started it for me, because that I can't remember his name, Simon Cowell's character.
Did you need 4 drinks and then another drink?
Well, no,
Simon Cowell.
Thank you. I think that's his character that does this. He's about to meet up with Andie MacDowell and Hugh Grant's character, and that guy comes downstairs. He's like, "Oh, I'll join you for a glass of whiskey. How about a cigar?" And I'm like, man, like I know he's annoying, but whiskey sounds really good right now. How can I incorporate this and keep it going throughout these movies? So,
I'm sorry, you thought Simon Cowell was annoying?
No. I mean, just from the perspective of Hugh Grant. He's like, okay. My God, this guy's a pest. So.
Okay. Are you talking about the boring guy that
it might have been him? Yeah, I'm
kept
sorry.
trying to in the first time he meets Andie MacDowell, the woman, the guy that was like, "Oh, she's not here. Let's you and me just talk for hours and hours and hours."
Yeah,
and it's like
the guy with the male pattern baldness, you could hear.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen him in a bunch of films, but I don't have his name off the top of my head. And Samara Weaving is the girl in Ready or Not.
Yes, she
it
is.
Came around eventually.
There you go.
All right. Well, then let's go ahead and let us move into our next film that was also nominated for Best Picture, the 1994 Oscars, Pulp Fiction.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration?
Miramax Films asks the question, what are 2 hitmen, 1 girlfriend, a boxer, and the secret suitcase have in common? What's the question answer? They're all part of the most electrifying film of the year. John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Uma Thurman, Harvey Keitel, and Bruce Willis. You won't know the facts until you see the fiction. Fiction, rated R. Starts October 14th everywhere.
And yes, this is Pulp Fiction from the year 1994. It is production managed by Paul Hellerman and Heidi Vogel. And sorry, I'm pulling up there's a big cast, folks, featuring the talents of Rosanna Arquette, Eric Stoltz, Jerome Patrick Hoban, Michael Gilden, Gary Sherrill, and Susan Griffiths.
Yes, the leads of the film.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot the important one. Hold on. Julie Sweeney.
You're just trying to make me regret doing this.
What? No.
Oh, yes, and Matthew Broderick as Truffles.
There are no small parts, only small actors. And Julia Sweeney.
Oh. Is that it? Is that all?
Is that all I have to say for it? I forgot.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay. So yeah, I mean, obviously this was directed by Quentin Tarantino. I mean, the trailer told you that. And included like Jack said, huge cast, including John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Uma Thurman, Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, and Amanda Plummer. I think the biggest name you said in that was Eric Stoltz.
I don't even know who Amanda Plummer is, so in fairness.
She's sweetheart, the female
Exactly.
robber.
The
I can't
female
remember.
robber.
I can't. Huh?
She's Christopher
Oh.
Plummer's daughter, I think.
Honey Bunny.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Honey Bun. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so like Javik was saying, this film is kind of an anthology, but a weaving anthology. It was very kind of oh, what's the word? A lot of films after this tried to copy it. It was very influential for the time. Really kind of started a lot of big trends, and really kind of, obviously it's not Tarantino's first film. That was Reservoir Dogs, but really kind of put Quentin Tarantino on the map, made him kind of a household name. Really everything started from Pulp Fiction. It actually won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes that year, and was nominated for all of these awards. This is definitely one of those films. I mean, I will say, if we go back 10 years ago, I had only ever seen, I think, one Tarantino film, and I think that was Django Unchained. Was the first one that I ever watched. And when I was done watching, like, I enjoyed it, but when I was done watching it, I was like, you know what? I don't think I've seen any other Quentin Tarantinos. So, I had not long after that found myself with a lot of time on my hands. So I basically just went and watched all of his stuff. And this, definitely was one that stuck out to me a lot because of, like I said, it really plays with narrative structure. It is an anthology, but all of the anthologies like kind of link, all of the stories kind of link together, very interconnected. All of these characters know each other, relate to each other, come in contact with each other at one point or another. But the story is not told in chronological sequence, but it is told in kind of a thematic sequence. So it gives it's a different way to relate to the story. And I mean, I'm not saying in no way was Quentin Tarantino the first to mess with narrative structure. And I mean, I'm sure, like, this film, Tarantino is very honest and open about his influences. So, he, took these types of ideas from a lot of different, but it was the way in which the stylish way in which it was done, and, all of this stuff that really kind of made it pop. And I don't know. This is one of those films that I think going in, I was like, I like it, but I'm probably not going to rate it very high. And every single time I watch it, it reminds me again why I like it so much. So it just kind of, I mean, unfortunately, Tarantino often likes to lean on things that aren't necessarily, wouldn't necessarily hold up today. I mean, the last film that he did, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Was definitely his most recent film, and it was probably my least favorite out of all of his films. I don't know if he's just not a filmmaker that is made for this time period or what it is. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some stuff that doesn't hold up in this film. But I don't know, a lot of the style and just the way the narrative is woven, it always wins me over. So I mean, what do you guys think about this?
I have seen this film many times. I watched it many years ago. Loved it then. I watched it many times since. I dated a girl for a long stretch of time who was big into Tarantino, so we watched it again many times. It was just one of our go-to movies on date nights. It's still been many years for me though since I'd last watched it, so I was curious to see how things would feel for me now. Um, I will say I was trying to budget my time away for watching all these movies, and I was trying to, again, per night. These are some long movies we have. I mean, if it's an Oscar nominee for Best Picture, it's going to be long, of course. But I was actually surprised when I read that this was the longest film we had to watch this time, because it was about 3 hours. And I'm thinking, that can't be that long. There's no way. And
it doesn't feel that long.
I was going to say, I watched it again, and to me, the pacing still feels fantastic. And that's something Tarantino is able to maintain very well throughout his career to me. While his films are very big and very bombastic and full of a very dense story, you can, for me at least, I can always feel like it's moving so much quicker than the film actually apparently is. With this particular film, yes, as you said, Clay, the 1970s crime influence is very strong in this, and it obviously was given a nice push into the 90s ultra violence that we were starting to explore, that we couldn't really see so much back then, because you couldn't make movies back in the 70s like you could in this particular film. So he took advantage of the modern proclivities and the modern allowances with, again, that 1970s kind of polish to it, and really made it his own. And that's, I think, why it hit so many people. It has a sense of nostalgia combined with, again, that freshness that does feel like it's very contemporary as well. The stories all feel very fresh, very engaging, very relatable. I think one of my favorite elements of the film itself is how it conveys a constant sense of dread in every story that it tells. There's always a sense of tension and unease and fear for what's going to happen. But the cool thing about this film is that if you had to write down at any given point where there's a bit of tension, like, the uncertainty of what's going to happen next, if you had to write down for your 3, 4, 5 things that you predict will happen, whatever happens is, in my opinion, not going to be what you would have guessed. Because every twist has its own uniqueness that still, in a sense, makes sense. I mean, you never would think that two characters that are fighting each other in a pawn shop are going to be held at gunpoint, dragged into a basement, and then confronted and guarded by a man in a gimp suit. You're never going to guess that. You're never going to guess that a character's head would be shot in the back of a car suddenly, thus making a hard right. It's that kind of fun. The film has a playfulness to it that makes you feel like you can relax into it and what the characters are going through and talking about. But then suddenly something will happen that you do not see coming, that because of that lightheartedness and that dialogue that Tarantino is so well known for, it brings you along with you. I mean, again, kind of to look back what we were talking about with Quiz Show, yes, this movie doesn't really have one set protagonist, but the way they endear you to them out the gate and then slowly leave them behind and culminate their arc in a way where you can either leave them be forever, never see them again, or, again, like a certain character in this film who meets an untimely end, you still feel a bit of a shock when that end does come.
And I will say, I think that's one of the most interesting things about the film, I mean, is the fact that you look at all of these people in the service, they're all assholes to a certain extent. Like, none of these people are good people. Probably the closest, and that's I'm really pushing, but probably the closest would be Samuel L. Jackson's character with his, desire for change towards the end. But for the most part, they're all different stages of bastard. Yet you do like them somehow. You do kind of root for them, while at the same time not being surprised if they something horrible happens to them, or they have a comeuppance or something like that. I mean, I was going to say, you mentioned that there is never-ending tension. Yeah, there's always, you never know when something can happen, but there's also a sense of play and fun that is constant as well.
I would agree. And a nice thing about it too, with the characters themselves, you mentioned Samuel L. Jackson. Yes, they all have their flaws and they all have their wants and their needs. And something, if you kind of focus on with the film, is that every character that resists the change that's kind of presented with them, as far as a moral, if essentially the characters that refuse to accept that change or go with it in the direction that's morally righteous, they do die. They basically meet an end that is unbecoming. I mean, every character that walks away from this film is one who had to make a serious life decision that went against who they were from the start. The other ones who didn't make it, well, they learned.
Yeah.
I'll come in on the other side for a minute. And
I was about to say, I know you have a different take on this.
I figured you wanted to go third on this.
All the hate comments. Bring them on. So I don't like Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction, was maybe the one that I had the highest expectations for going back into my rewatches, because it was the first Tarantino movie that I saw. And then I saw a whole bunch of Tarantino after that and discovered I really love Tarantino. I love so many of his movies. And so I was like, yes, now that I understand Tarantino, I'm going to go back, I'm going to watch Pulp Fiction, and I'm going to love it. And I did not. I don't find it fun. I don't find maybe it's because it just got memed to death for me. I don't know.
Sure.
But I did not find the dialogue nearly as engaging as anything in any of his other films. I didn't find the violent moments that are suddenly shocking, and I didn't find any of those like fun the way that they often are. I did not really. I could not wrap my head around why characters were interlinked the way they were. Like, for a while, we had all these characters coming together in one scene at the end, and then we just have Bruce Willis, who is living his own timeline off to the end. So it felt less like a series of different stories and more like two stories, and one forgot to be as much as the others. And I absolutely believe that this was incredibly influential, that this was incredibly important as a movie. I am not in any way denying that it changed a lot about cinema, and that it did some really, really cool things with how we with making nonlinear movies much more for the masses, for everybody to be able to watch and understand and enjoy. I had such high hopes for this, and I just didn't like it. I just didn't have any fun with it. And the one thing that I liked the Samuel L. Jackson scene at the very, very end where he's interacting with Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer. I thought that's probably my favorite scene. That was the only moment in the entire thing where I had any interest in what was happening to any of the characters, or where I enjoyed any of the dialogue. I was like, this one's actually making me think a little bit. This one, I'm noticing that this is fun. But so something, I don't know what Tarantino did that he then veered off of that worked for me. But this was, I really had high hopes that I was going to fall, because I get that all the playfulness you're talking about, I get that from his other movies. I feel that in his other movies, and I wanted so badly to feel that in this. I wanted to get it. I wanted to be on board with this train of people who love Pulp Fiction, and I just don't care about any of it, and it's very sad.
It's because you haven't talked fast food with your best friend in the car riding to a job.
I probably have.
I will say, maybe we can all agree on one thing. What is everyone's least favorite character from this film? Like, who do you think would be the worst character?
How essential, like, how important are we going?
I mean, that's up to you.
Okay.
I was about to say, Hannah might just hate them all.
if you could, like,
well, you're naming all the side characters, all the actors at the beginning, and I was like, maybe I would have liked their stories more. Like, maybe that's the Pulp Fiction I wanted to see.
If you could take a club to any one character from this film, who would it be?
Uma Thurman.
Really?
I could not care less about her. Like, wow. She was the one I was least interested in.
I mean, I will say she's the one that I'm like, oh, you're so stupid. Because she causes her own issues. But I love that dance scene. So I don't know. I mean, probably the character that annoys me the most, but at the same time, I also feel really bad for, because she seems to be in a horrible, horrible relationship, is Bruce Willis's girlfriend.
I almost said her, and I was like, no, actually, I want to know what's going on in her head that she's going along with this and being okay with it.
I mean, I think that the character itself, like her talking about a pot belly and all that kind of stuff, I'm just like, oh, okay, whatever. But, when she stays after he, yells and I mean, sure, he says, oh, I'm sorry, but there's more behind that. That is not a good relationship. That's not something you want to stay in. That's not healthy. But yeah, I mean, I feel like you had somebody in mind, Jack.
Oh, it was Bruce Willis's girlfriend for me.
Oh, really? Okay.
I was gonna say, did you have
I mean, I
something
wouldn't
in mind
want
that
to
it was none
beat
of our
her
answers?
because I feel bad for her.
Well, I mean, not necessarily, but
she's sad enough already.
well, I mean, yeah, she's in a horrible situation, but she also it's also in part because she has absolutely zero agency, and
Yeah.
you know,
Agreed.
While I don't appreciate how Bruce Willis's character treats her, much less the situation that he put them in by his own choosing.
Yeah.
The fact that she just basically sat in a hotel room the entire time watching TV while he was out about to be anally raped by a guy it's troublesome to me. And again, I'm not saying she should necessarily go with him. He would never have allowed that. But
yeah,
at the same time, I feel like that character could have been used in a more in a stronger sense to the characters.
She needs a sequel where she goes all Kill Bill and
sure.
and goes back.
You know things are fucked up when the best relationship in the entire film is Pumpkin and Honey Bunny.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean,
absolutely.
they're messed up, but they've got
they care about each other.
A great relationship. They love each other. They support each other. They care about each other.
They try to keep each other from getting shot.
Be cool, Honey Bunny. Be cool.
Yeah. For a while, I rooted. I would, for a sec, say my favorite relationship was between Travolta and Thurman, just because, again, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with twists taking unexpected routes. You think for a while it's going to be the rest of that story is going to be will they, won't they, and then it's neither one, not even by a mile. It's a
completely different issue coming up.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with them,
which is cool. I like that.
Yeah.
It does take interesting twists there.
They leave it alone too in a way that it feels satisfying narratively, because it's not like they have like this prolonged sexual tension with one another in the time you see them afterward. It's like, no, their relationship's done. That night happened and it's never happening again.
Yeah. But I mean, they leave it in a place, I mean, in spite of what happens to characters, in other, moments in the film later on, that you could see more possibly happening in the future. But we're going to leave it there right now.
Right.
They leave it open-ended is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
In a very interesting way, I think.
And my drink I chose for this film was, of course, a $5 shake. I watched it earlier today.
Yeah.
Well, $6 if you count the delivery fee, but
right.
Grubhub.
I was about to say, I don't know about you guys, but every time I see that scene, I'm like, I want to try that shake. I want to try that shake.
I think Binging with Babish has a recipe for something that he made along those lines.
Yeah.
You ever watch his show?
There you go.
No.
You haven't seen Binging with Babish?
I don't think so.
Oh, it's great. He goes a little bit crazy sometimes, but he's like a crazy talented chef, and he basically makes very complex recipes based off of movie stuff. So like he'll have like a Bob's Burger episode, or he'll have again a $5 shake episode where he tells you how to make the perfect shake.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, is there anything else?
This podcast is not sponsored by Binging with Babish, by the way. So
no, I don't even know him. So, all right. Did anybody want to say anything else before we move on? Very nice. Very nice. Nice Foley. All right. So with that, we are going to move on to the fourth film in the list, which was The Shawshank Redemption.
I hereby order you to serve 2 life sentences back to back.
Behind the walls of Shawshank Prison,
It's my wife! Don't you understand? My wife! Get her out!
you can't stop a man from dreaming.
There's something inside they can't touch.
Sometimes you can't stop him at all. Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, The Shawshank Redemption, rated R. At select theaters, September 23rd.
All right. So yes, that was the fourth film, and I don't know why I started talking. That's you.
I would like to introduce this film. No, it's Shawshank Redemption, directed by Frank Darabont, based, of course, on a short story by Stephen King. It stars Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, and then a supporting cast including Bob Gunton, William Sadler, and Clancy Brown. and yeah, set in Shawshank State Penitentiary, and the story between a banker who is accused of murdering his wife and her lover, and then a fellow prisoner he befriends, but also kind of just how he works his way up the ladder and makes his way through prison life. This was after 3 movies talking about how I felt absolutely nothing for any of these characters. I did feel something for these characters, which is nice. I was it does a really nice job. It's not a stellar movie for me, but it's very solid. Like, there's very little I can find to fault with it. It's very well written, it's very well paced, it's extremely well acted. It does a really great job of showing the difficulty and the cruelty in this prison without making it feel like it's sensationalizing it, although it is a fairly sentimental movie, but it does a pretty good job with that and making them feel like real characters. Some of the smaller side stories were just absolutely stunning in how they were told, and it was. And on top of that, I think Tim Robbins' character especially is a character who I didn't mind watching on screen for 2.5 hours. Like, he was an interesting character who had who you're trying to figure out for a good chunk of the movie whether or not he is guilty of the stuff that he's been accused of. It doesn't fully tell you until a little bit later on in the story, and so you're always kind of trying to figure out who this person is and what makes him tick and why he responds to stuff in this prison differently than other people do. And I think they do just a really great job with that. And the ending hit exactly the emotional beats it was supposed to for me. It finished and I felt good and I felt happy and I felt satisfied with the story that had been told to me. And so while it's not one that I would ever that I don't feel any urge to watch it a third time, I think this does everything it's trying to do, and I completely get why it's on this list.
I mean, I will say the first thing I want to say is I find it interesting that you mentioned that we're trying to figure out whether or not he did it for most of the film. Mm-hmm. And I will say that is definitely the way the film is laid out. Mm-hmm. This is the first time I realized that, and I have seen this movie I don't know how many times. I feel like, I don't know, I mean, I think the first like 2 or 3 times I watched it like on like a TV edit. But I don't know. And I mean, first time I watched it was in 2001. So by the time that happened, I think I may have just like, I feel like every other time that I've watched this, I just, went in knowing, okay, he was falsely accused, blah, 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 blah. It wasn't until this time that I was like, oh, this was designed for you to not be certain. And for really, you're not supposed to know until the Blatch story, where the guy confesses. And I mean, I think really at that point it's like, was he even being honest? I think the idea is that you're supposed to decide for yourself, but I don't know, this film has always like been pitched to me like, oh yeah, no, he was definitely innocent, he was definitely framed, all this kind of stuff.
I think that's kind of how it's entered. I think that's how it's entered the zeitgeist.
Right.
But watching it, I couldn't remember which way it had gone. I couldn't remember whether it turned out that he was falsely accused, whether we were going to have a scene where he says, I did it, but I felt really terrible about it.
Sure.
Because he was clearly not supposed to be like an evil person. He was supposed to clearly be the good guy. And whether that meant that he had done this thing in a moment of drunken passion and it's haunting him, or whether it was and haunting him to the point where he couldn't admit it, or where he was falsely accused. I felt either one was justified and I couldn't remember which way it went.
I honestly, like, I don't know. I mean, I will say that, like I said, the majority of the times that I've watched this, it's been edited in one way or another. In fact, there were some things even on this watch that I was like, I don't completely remember seeing that part before. So I don't know if maybe that, messed with the narrative, and therefore that's why I never caught that. And so I don't know if I would have, if when I had seen it for the first time, I had gone into it, seen it the way that they intended for me to not know, not be sure, you know, at the very least until that scene. I don't know if it would have hit me hard. I mean, here's the thing. I do like this movie. I've always enjoyed it. But I think partially because it is so much in the cultural zeitgeist and partially because I have seen it so many times, it's lost a lot of the power for me.
I think that 3 of these 5 movies have been like so heavily integrated into our culture that like, I mean, I would absolutely believe that for you, that Shawshank has been memed to death the way that Pulp Fiction probably was for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, you know, I feel like maybe I would have, it would mean more to me had I, you know, seen that earlier or, you know, whatever. I will say I, a couple years ago, started, I read my first, Stephen King book. And then I was like, that was really good, but really long. So let me read some of his novellas, you know, some of his shorter ones. And I did this one and I did The Green Mile. I will say the big thing about those 2 stories, if you're going to read them, in my opinion, the movie of this is better and the story of Green Mile is better. I mean, they're both they're both directed by Frank Darabont. In fact, you don't really even need to know who directed them to know that it was probably the same person, because if you look at the cast, there are at least 4 people from that cast that's in this cast. You know, and not huge characters. I mean, I think some of them have bigger roles in The Green Mile. Well, actually, William Sadler's role is much smaller in The Green Mile, but you know, there's, you know, you get a little bit more or less of different characters. Like the guy who played the prosecutor in this one plays one of the lead guards in The Green Mile.
He's in every Frank Darabont project, actually.
That doesn't surprise me. I think William Sadler is too, isn't he? Or in a lot, at least.
He in the 3 films of his I've seen, I don't know if Bill Sadler is in Walking Dead or not, though. That's the only one that I'm not sure about because I haven't seen past the second season. He is in The Mist. I do remember him in that one.
Sure. Oh yeah, because I forgot that guy is one of the leads in like the first 2 seasons. But yeah, no, I mean, I do like this story, but I don't know. I think partially because I just have seen it so many times, it's some of it has worn off on me. I will say that one thing that I have always believed is that Tim Robbins in this movie is extremely underrated. I have always loved his performance. I always thought that the subtlety of his performance is one of the best things I have seen in a film. And I remember when I first saw this, I was like, oh, well, obviously Morgan Freeman and Tim Robbins are both nominated because they're both great in this movie. And Morgan Freeman I think Morgan Freeman, though, is he nominated for Best Actor for this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was he? Okay.
Yeah, which I want to talk about that in a second too. But I think he was nominated for Best Actor, but Tim Robbins was not nominated for Best Supporting. And from what I understand, a lot of people actually did not like Tim Robbins in this movie, which I don't understand at all. Like, to me, his kind of, you know, the wry smile and the just quietness with which he plays this character is brilliant. But yeah, I mean, that is a thing similar. I will say probably less confusing, but similar to what we talked about with Quiz Show, is a lot of people, it's hard to decide who is the lead in this. I do think honestly that I see, well, once again, the film is about Tim Robbins' character, Andy Dufresne. Our narrator, our point person, the person that we are following through all of this, really is Morgan Freeman's character. So, I mean, I think it's a toss up, but I honestly think it makes a little bit more sense to see Morgan Freeman as the lead and, you know, Tim Robbins as the supporting, even though the story is more about him.
This movie for me is one of those I've watched it many times, but every time I always go into it prepared to be skeptical because you know, this is one of those movies. This movie, I think, still, if not for a long time, sits at the #1 spot on IMDb. Which, again, I think I personally think it's a great film. I don't think it's the best film. I think I can see why by mass populace it's considered the best film. But you know, again, that is what it is. This is one of those movies for me, one of those rare movies that you're very lucky if you can find in your lifetime where you know you watch it and you watch it many times, and every time you get something from it that you didn't really recognize the previous time that you saw it. And that for me is Shawshank is that example for me. This movie I saw when I was in my mid-teens. I watched it on a tiny 12-inch glass TV with like a little VCR built in the bottom. I wasn't supposed to. My parents were not okay with it. Actually, no, I was younger than 16. But anyway, my parents were not okay with it. But I loved it so much that I literally asked them the next night if we could watch it together, and they thought it was and them thinking it was my first time seeing the film. We're like, okay, but that's kind of the first impression I had with it. Seeing it again, I absolutely loved it again. I found it just as captivating. I found the story pacing wonderful. I found the characters just as enriching as the first time. Again, I think that's one of the things that a lot of people gravitate towards. Honestly, with a lot of Darabont stuff, not just this film, with The Mist, with Green Mile, I think the characters, even the smaller ones, have a resonance with you. I mean, Brooks is a very small character, but like James Whitmore's performance, along with just the arc of the character itself, do leave a lasting impact on you. Even smaller characters like Bill Sadler's character in the film. I mean, that sort of thing, again, like the horse apple scene, there's like little moments like that they intersperse just enough to where even a character with not as big an impact in the main story per se still leaves you with a little sequin to remember the film. I think to piggyback off what you were saying, Clay, in regards to the protagonist, recent rewatches have kind of convinced me more so that I think Red is one I consider more the protagonist of the film, and Andy's story being the plot. And honestly, this past takeaway for me, I kind of consider the title itself to be more in reference to the journey that Red makes more than Andy's literal one in this case. Because the thing about this film is that, if you really look back on it, Andy's story, while Robbins gives a very great, albeit restrained performance, which is why I think he didn't get as much recognition. He doesn't have his big bombastic moments. It's very quiet and pulled back.
But see, that's why I love it.
For sure. Yeah. But you also compare to Morgan Freeman, who has his very intense monologue towards the end, and he has his highs and his lows that you get to see. You really, compared to everyone else at least, you really don't learn that much about Andy, about who he is, about who he wants, what he wants, what his needs are. I mean, what drives him. I mean, he has the result that he does at the end of the film, which explains a lot, which fills in a lot of those gaps. But the film, I think, does a great job of having this character who's so hyper focused with the film's storyline, but yet it introduces you more by its design to getting introduced and acquainted with the other people around him. So much so it's like a magic trick in and of itself with the whole twist, because again, like the supporting characters are the Rita Hayworth, if you will, whereas Andy is what's behind it. And I think the film does an excellent job again with its pacing, with everything that goes about it. And again, I think everyone who says out there that narration and voiceover narration over the film for exposition that is bad writing, go fuck yourself, because this is a case where it works excellently, and the film honestly could not function half as well without it.
I mean, there definitely are films where it is definitely a crutch and it doesn't always work, but yes, this is definitely an example where it's used beautifully. I mean, and a lot of that is, I mean, you guys haven't read the book, but the book is okay. You have. So the book is set up the exact same way. with Red narrating it.
Oh.
I mean, the book, honestly, part of what I think doesn't work as well about it is that it's much more disjointed. The character of the warden is actually 3 characters that they put into one for the film. And I think even Clancy Brown's character, the lead guard, wasn't really even one character.
Correct.
I think it was also an amalgam.
I think it works. I think the book's intent and the way that the book works and the way that it does. Because I agree with you, Clay. I think the film is superior, but the book is seeking more to make the villain of the story, or at least the central villain, the institution, more so than a specific person.
Yeah.
The film, though, given that you have someone to root against, it can't have that kind of ambiguity.
It's hard in a film to make. I mean, the idea of institutionalism, but the actual, like, it's kind of hard to make that the villain unless you're going to have the prison come to life, which, probably not the film for this.
And I think for the film, it brings out the institution as the villain by making individuals within it villains.
Right, exactly.
So
they represent the villainy of the institution. Yeah.
And so we start hating just them, and then as it goes on and we really start to understand as Brooks leaves and we start to understand the long-term impact that this is having on people, we start to realize that it's bigger. It's beyond these this guard and this warden. It's a bigger issue than that. And I think it does a great job I think it's very smart of it to choose 1 or 2 people to focus that hatred on, that anger on, so that then it's really interesting to pull back from that.
Right.
Well, on top of that, I think the film does a good enough job conveying the sense of the institution also being a villain without having to shortchange on the Norton character.
Absolutely.
By conveying so well the use of how Andy gets screwed by the system as well as how he benefits from it. Because the way that he even gets in with the prisoners is by manipulating the system, by going to Red for contraband. But again, it's also breaking those rules that gets him in deep with Norton, and again leads him to his lowest point in the story.
It's interesting the way things weave in and out that way. I mean, he even makes the point that, outside he was, never a criminal, never did, and he had to go to prison to become a crook. But I mean, I will say, I think that this film, probably more than any of the others on this list, for me, is hurt by the kind of what's around it. The whole, like, I really push back on the whole #1 film on IMDb. No, it's not. It's good, but it's that idea that if overestimating something often can hurt it the most.
I think it's one of those movies, though. Sometimes you end up with films that are #1 not because they are the best, most transcendent movies ever, but this is a tough film to hate. I think this is your people across the board it's so well made that most people, even if they don't love it, are likely to be like, yes, I acknowledge that this is good. And so sometimes that gets pushed up to the top just because nobody hates this movie.
It's that aggregate, which it might not be actually #1 on a lot of people's lists, but it's also not the last.
It's the Rotten Tomatoes score versus the Metacritic, the one that measures just thumbs up or thumbs down, and everybody's happy to give this a thumbs up.
It's kind of the thing. I think part of the reason why it's just the most, according to IMDb, the most beloved mainstream movie is because it appeals to everybody. I mean, there's not one person out there who's going to take a movie that has a very good presentation of the idea of hope in a universal sense quite as well as this, because this is the kind of movie that there's not really a group out there that gets marginalized by it. There's no one out there that can't relate to the tribulations and trials of the characters. There's something in this movie for everybody, and I think that's what draws so many people into it enough to give it that upvote on IMDb and places like that, because it's rare to find someone who's going to feel offended by Shawshank Redemption beyond, that 80-year-old clutching her pearls.
I do have one friend who famously refuses to watch this movie because and it's come into the lexicon of our friends as being Shawshanking a movie, is refusing to watch it for absolutely no valid reason whatsoever.
Right, but
people are like,
not,
you probably like it, and he's like,
I was
nope,
about to say,
never.
it's not necessarily that they don't like it, it's that they just don't want to watch it.
Just boycotting it for zero reason.
Right. Well, as long as they don't, start putting out articles telling people why it's evil, I don't have a problem with that. All right. Does anybody want to say anything else about this film before we move on to our final film?
I drink light beer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go.
Excellent.
I initially tried finding something with the word bogs in it, like a cocktail, but I couldn't.
Sure. Honestly, though, drinking a cold beer really fits in with the tone of the film. Yeah. So, all right. So let us go ahead and get into our final film on the list, which was this year's Best Picture winner, Forrest Gump.
Paramount Pictures presents...
My name's Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump.
The story of a man...
Are you stupid or something? Stupid is, stupid does, sir.
...who was good at just one thing. Life. Tom Hanks.
I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
Forrest Gump, rated PG-13. Starts Wednesday, July 6th at theaters everywhere.
All right. So, yes, Forrest Gump. This was directed by Robert Zemeckis. And, of course, stars Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Gary Sinise, McKelty Williamson, and Sally Field. And it follows the character of Forrest Gump basically throughout, I believe it starts in like the 50s. Yeah, 1951. Starts in the 50s, goes through the 80s, and basically follows this character who is has some learning disabilities, has a low IQ, but seemingly is apparently the linchpin of
American society.
Yes, of American history. This film, okay, so it won Best Picture at the Oscars. Tom Hanks won his second straight Best Actor award for this. And I believe in that year, like, it was well received by critics, well received by audiences, but at least from what I have heard and perceived, the backlash was quick and pretty strong for this film. I will say I saw this film for the first time probably like 15 years ago. And it's never been my favorite. Like, I've liked it, but to be honest, I like this film less every time that I watch it. And I think that part of that is that, the more socially aware that I become, the more kind of just aware in general, the more I see that this film is trying very hard to be relevant, very hard to be part of so many, things in history, yet telling us very little about what it thinks about any of them. And I don't know, like, it really sticks in my craw to see that. And let's start off with the first thing that I always forget every time I watch this movie. And then I watch it and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that that's a thing. The fact that the lead character is named after the guy that started the Ku Klux Klan. And of course, his way of pushing that off is, well, Mama said she named me that so that I would remember that sometimes people do silly things. And I was like, that's the worst reason in the world for giving anyone. And I mean, I'm sorry, if you met a child and he said, hi, my name's Hitler. My parents named me that because they wanted me to remember that sometimes people are silly. I'd say, no, I think your parents were Nazis and then they felt bad about it and now they're lying to you. This film was based on a book. I have not read the book, but I don't know if that story was changed from the book, because that whole reasoning for naming someone a name like that makes absolutely no sense to me. But and as like, I don't know, like the film to me like is just so ineffectual in so many ways. Like it feels not exactly the same, but in the same mold as like a Driving Miss Daisy. Like it is coming up to, saying, it's like, we want to say really important things, but we also don't want to offend anybody. So we're going to say it like we're going to do things like in the least, offensive way possible. They bring up the Vietnam War, they bring up, civil rights, and they have him interact in all of these things. But because of the nature of the character, he doesn't necessarily know what's going on. So he doesn't necessarily, at least he doesn't express any opinions about these things. And the film also doesn't express opinions about these things. And it's like, I feel like at this point, it's pretty okay to say that you were behind the civil rights movement. It's pretty okay to say you were against the Vietnam War. I don't think that's really going to ruffle a whole lot of feathers. And if it is, who needs those people? And I just, it skirts on so many things. And I feel like it's more, this reminds me of like, I feel like they're trying to do a similar thing for the Hal Ashby film Being There, 1979, Peter Sellers' last film, where also a character with learning disabilities who basically is thrust into very powerful political situations. But the thing there is that he doesn't know what's going on, but he's a cipher. Everybody believes that he's whatever they want him to be. And I feel like they're trying to do a very similar thing with Forrest, but Being There is a satire, and it's saying so much through that device. And I don't feel like Forrest Gump is really saying anything other than, making silly jokes about shit happens. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of things that I do enjoy about this film. While I mean, obviously, I think Gary Sinise as Lieutenant Dan is one of the, his performance in this film is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Everybody has heard the rant of Samuel L. Jackson saying that, he should have won Best Supporting Actor, but instead it was given to Martin Landau. We might talk about Ed Wood later. In my opinion, had it not gone to Martin Landau, it probably would have gone to Gary Sinise, because he's phenomenal in this film. His whole, tirade to Forrest, in the scene in the hospital when he pulls him off the bed, one of the best parts of the film. I think that I'm in no way saying that Tom Hanks is not good in this film. I think that his the fact that he was playing a character who was mentally challenged was probably given too much weight. I will say that the scenes in which pretty much from the moment that he actually gets together with Jenny from then on are my favorite parts of him in the film. Everything before that is just, you know, it's one endless joke after another, and it's like, okay, yeah, he was pivotal in American history. It feels like we're doing kind of that, you know, autism gives you superpowers kind of thing, and it's like, no, it doesn't. But those real human emotions where, you know, he realizes that the young boy played by Haley Joel Osment is his son, and he suddenly is like, you know, he feels at first like he's done something wrong. And then when she relays his fears about that, he's terrified that, you know, he's passed on, because he knows that he's not like everybody else. And he's terrified that, you know, his son is going to be the same way. And, you know, that whole, when she conveys to him that, no, he's very smart and all this kind of stuff, that I love that. And, you know, the scenes with him and Jenny, you know, after they're married, all that stuff, I love. It's everything up to that where, like, honestly, I feel like this could have just been a really good short film if they had just introduced Forrest and then done, and, you know, a little bit of him and Jenny's relationship, and then done that last bit of the film. That's all I need. All that other shit leading up to it, I don't like it. It's funny once, and then they just keep hitting the same joke, and I'm done. Sorry,
So,
I'm a little bit of a rant. You guys haven't said a thing.
Well, so. If you take I'm just gonna say, if you take everything Clay just said and put put a negative in every sentence, that's what I thought. Well, not entirely, but like very much. I hate the stuff with Jenny.
Wow.
Well, mostly, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, okay, I will say that some of the stuff, like their relationship in the part leading up to that, I'm not a huge fan of. I just once, you know, he, you know, goes to Savannah to meet her, I like everything from there on. Yeah. But no, apparently you feel differently.
You saw me laugh when you said that. It wasn't because I thought you were wrong. I was just like, oh, okay, so we have exact opposite opinions of that. Okay. For me, I think that's fascinating to look at it as almost like through a failed satire lens. I definitely don't see that. I think there are issues with the film.
I mean, I'm not saying I see it as a failed satire. I don't think they were trying to do a satire.
I mean, I don't either, which is why I don't have a problem that they weren't trying to say anything.
Sure.
I guess is what I'm saying. I think if anything, if you're, because I think these things happen in the story, and I think whether you think this was effectively conveyed or not, whatever. But I think because I don't think they leave the question of war unanswered. like I think it's pretty clear that Forrest is deeply hurt by what happened in the war. He lost friends, and he knows people who lost everything. And
I think my main reason for that is that scene where they have him get up and express something about the war, and apparently it was profound and great, but they mute him actually taking a stance about the war. Like, I feel like that's very pointed.
I don't think it would have. I'll say it this way. I think I would have really not liked if it had been more overt about it.
Sure,
I think I would not have wanted to hear that speech.
I think my main thing with that is if you're, I'm just saying, if you're going to not have it be said, then don't have him say anything.
But
because it sounds like that you don't want to take a stance.
I mean, I think that the stance it's taking at that point, I mean, again, I think this is reading more into it than it probably is. But but I think you could read in that there's a stance there. But I think the stance there is not about, is the Vietnam War good or bad? I think it's, how do people treat veterans?
Sure.
And so that's the stance it's making. So it doesn't matter what he has to say, because the point is that they assumed that he would be on their side. They brought him up there, and then whatever he said was good enough for them. And so I don't think I think like so many things in Forrest's life, he's kind of pushed in situations no matter what he actually thinks or feels about it.
Mhm.
And I think to me that worked, because I don't think it was I think it had already said plenty about how harmful the war was. I don't think it needed to say more. We saw his sadness after he lost people, and we heard the things that he said about it. I think the speech would have been overkill in that department. And I think as for a lot of the rest of them, I think for the civil rights one, I think the goal or the assumed goal of this is, again, I think you're right that taking a stance that civil rights is good was not controversial in 1994, or not highly controversial, but that's why I think they didn't need to. Like, because what they did was they had him, they again, whether you think this is a good tactic for storytelling or not is a whole different question, but trying to do it from the point of view of, if you take away the politicization, all the political aspects of it, all the details of the ins and outs of why is this good, why is this bad, which side is for this, when it comes down to it, he wanted to help somebody who dropped their stuff. And I think they were trying to get at that, the idea, and I think that was probably the same with the war, trying to get at the idea that if they were getting at anything, it was the idea that if you take the big fancy intellectual politics out of it, which not that you always should, but there is a core there that's worth listening to, that there is a core of people being heard or people being helped, and whether it was successful or not at that is that. But I think it would have felt really weird to me if the movie had suddenly had somebody say civil rights are good, or Forrest just said Vietnam War was bad. That would have felt so out of place to me, because I don't feel like that's what it was about. So I was just fascinated by that.
Yeah, I'm not saying I wasn't necessarily looking for anything overt. I'm just, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm not wording it exactly correct, but there were just points at which I felt like they were intentionally being very middle of the road, and I'm just like, I didn't need a big speech. Right. I'm just saying I didn't feel like enough. Like I felt very much in certain places that we were playing both sides, like, because we get very negative views of the anti-war protesters after that scene. And it's like, I'm not saying, that, obviously they're human. Of course, those things could have happened, but it's a very odd thing to, play up after we didn't.
After showing all the negatives of the war in his life. That's what I don't understand. So I guess I don't feel like the war was portrayed positively in any way, aside from maybe the fact that he made connections with people, which is an absolutely true thing.
Right.
Like that's something that happened. People come back from those, and because they've been through trauma together, there are very close connections. Those bonds are real. And so to me, I don't feel like there was anything. I assumed that anything he had to say about the war was negative, because he had been so clear. That was so clear to me beforehand. And I'm not saying you're wrong about this. I'm just fascinated that was what you came away with, when I was like, oh, it is, if I was going to assume this movie thought anything about the Vietnam War, it would obviously be against it, because that's how it affects him in a negative way, which is really funny to me. But it's not funny to me. That
I don't know. I mean,
in a negative way, but
maybe I'm remembering it. I mean, sure, a lot of this was definitely feeling, so
absolutely.
Maybe I'm just remembering the examples in a different way, but yeah, I mean, that's the feeling I came away with.
Interesting.
Jack, you've been very quiet contemplating over there while we
I
have less detailed stuff that I could talk about too, but Jack, go for it.
I was gonna say, I didn't really want to go off into my diatribe until you guys had at it for a little bit. On a lighter note, I'll start by saying that for this movie, I drank 13 Dr. Peppers.
Excellent.
And possibly unrelated, but I haven't slept or had an erection in 4 days. But moving on. So with this movie, I kind of feel similarly to you both in a respect. I think the point of the film itself is to, in a very general sense, is to tell the story of a good person, albeit again, I would stress this, a passive protagonist that is only affected by outside factors. Well, I mean, that's any protagonist, but let me expand on that a little bit. So I think with Forrest, I think the mechanic of introducing his disability is so that he doesn't have to take a stance in those things. So he has no draw to those things. The reason is because he can be a little bit more apathetic in terms of social and political issues, because the only things that affect him in the story are the things that are the people and the events that directly connect with him. He goes to Vietnam because actually, why does he go to Vietnam? Is he drafted?
They just offered
he
him
didn't
after he
know
gets
what
out of
else
high
to
school.
do, and
He
they
gets
handed him
out of college,
for
and they were like,
sure,
"You want to join the military?"
That. He would not have signed up if
like,
that
okay.
hadn't happened.
No.
Like there's nothing in this movie he would have done. Like he wouldn't have even met Jenny if she didn't said you can sit here. Every single time something major or even minor in his life happens to him, it's because a character, an outside character, or a character who's very biased in a certain direction or in some persuasion approaches him with that notion. I mean, same thing with all the actions. In regards to the war itself, again, I don't think the film is necessarily saying it's for or against war, but I also don't think it's not making a statement. I think that, again, we're supposed to view the war through Forrest's eyes and take away the pain and and to a degree the joys he takes from it, because he does meet Bubba. He does have a wonderful relationship with him because of the war. I mean, whether however you break it down. The civil rights, it's the same thing. He's brought in and he just speaks earnestly. You can, your mind kind of fills the blanks of whatever he's saying. It's probably very matter of fact. It's probably something that's very, I don't want to say milk toast. I want to say just something very straightforward, but the people listening in just over interpreted it to mean something a lot deeper than it perhaps was. That's what I personally took away from that particular moment where the mic feed is cut. So with this particular film, I think, again, the running thing with him, pardon the pun, is that you're supposed to view the world through his eyes in a way where there are no real politics that matter. There's nothing outside of life that matters beyond everything that you come in contact with yourself. With him, I think that's what makes him so endearing compared to someone who would be considered a narcissist for those same qualities. He's challenged so much in that movie to take a side. I mean, like when Lieutenant Dan pulls him aside and starts berating him for saving him in the war. I mean, Forrest doesn't understand the idea of Lieutenant Dan's concept of trying to his self-fulfilling prophecy for himself. He just wanted to save someone that he cares about. That's all that matters to him. I mean, there's few moments where you do see a bigger picture. There are some moments in the film where you do see that, where where he gets shot, for example, where he has to go save Bubba. The idea of those things happening where he does take those active stances, and it's those moments where you really start seeing him going in a different direction. Like when he starts running, that's something that's not really based off of anything but his own decision. But those few times are so few and far between in the overall series of events in the film that, again, he kind of fits more that, like I said, that mold of that again, like I said, passive protagonist. So again, I don't think the film. I think the film wants you to have a sense of ambivalence in this. It doesn't want you to necessarily take a side, because to someone like Forrest Gump, there are more important things, and that's the little things.
Yeah, that's what I did not say that well when I went, but I think you're right. Not that that the film isn't. I don't think the film is not taking a stance to try to appeal to both sides. I think where it's being quieter, or where it's not saying it overtly, it's because it only as far as it matters to Forrest, only as far as it affects Forrest. And since the whole story is told very much through his voice, that's important. I think going outside of that would shatters that a little bit. And I think it's and is not what the story is asking for.
To draw a little bit of a comparison, if I may, actually, have you two seen the movie Little Big Man?
I have not.
No.
If you haven't, I really recommend it. It's a very similar construct. It's a character proceeding through a lot of very significant historical moments in life. It stars Dustin Hoffman, who is fantastic in it. Very young Dustin Hoffman. Wonderful film. I can't stress that enough. But again, a similar thing where because of who he is, he's dragged throughout so many points in history and so many different eras in his life. And he has horrors and he has joys, but they're all a direct result of the very close things that happened to him. You know, I won't go too much into detail, but he basically meets Custer at one point in the film, and his interactions with him are like something that, you know, you might not expect to see someone interact with Custer in a modern day historical film that's made nowadays. So it's a similar sense of that for me. Yeah.
And I ended up placing this when I was looking through and ranking these. This ended up going above Shawshank, and it's not because I actually think it's a better movie than Shawshank. It was just, but it was the only movie of these 5 that I did not look at my watch and go, oh my gosh, I still have so much more to go. It kept me engaged throughout in a way that I hadn't anticipated. I knew that I really liked it the first time I saw it. I was expecting it to drop down because I first saw it like 15 years ago or something when I was a kid. And so I was expecting it to drop down, and I was pleased with how much I still, I think, Jack, you're right. I think endearing is the right word for this. I was still drawn to this character, and I was still drawn to caring about how things were going for him. And even though things always magically work out for him, most of the time, I found it. I went back and forth for a while about whether this or Shawshank was better, and well, not better, which one was my favorite. I think Shawshank is objectively better, but I think I would much rather rewatch Forrest Gump. And aside from, again, the stuff at the end with Jenny, I don't like that at the end. I don't want him and Jenny to get together. She's terrible. And I'm not convinced that she's changed at the end. So I feel bad for him when he ends up with a son and then from her, and then she's just gone.
Sure.
But I think Tom Hanks is great in this. I think he manages to, convey with such, he limits himself physically during this, both in his voice and his facial expressions, in his body language, to show the character and the character's limitations as well. And I think he still manages to convey so much, even pulling all his acting tools way back, which is impressive to me. That's something where when somebody can keep, you know, a monotone voice for the entire thing and still be conveying everything that their character feels, that's an impressive thing. I think the heart of the character shines through really, really well in his performance. And so whether it was Best Actor worthy, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look and see what else was this year. I don't think it was even my favorite of the bunch that I saw here. I think I would put Ralph Fiennes above him. I think I would probably put Tim Robbins above him. But I think, but I think he was solid here. So I'm still slightly more aligned with the Academy at this point, but I'm happy to admit Shawshank, I think, is a better movie. I just like this one more. This one touches me more.
If I'm going to throw any shade at this particular movie, I think, in a major sense, it would be that it's a weird criticism, but this movie is, if I had to pick a movie for a stereotypical quintessential Oscar bait movie, like if you had
Oscar baity. Yeah.
If you had a group of people in one room who have never seen this film before, and you could like hand like them all like a bingo card with all the stereotypes of like what typically gets recognized for the Oscars, you know, drug addiction, character with a disability, war, you know,
the mother dies.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like this film codified a lot of those things, because I think
definitely.
You know, a lot of these weren't necessarily were kind of firsts for the Academy to recognize, but yeah, it became the template.
Well, it gave way to like Simple Jack.
Yeah, and the fact that it puts all these things together in one movie, I think it does it pretty well.
I do too.
Especially because like we were talking about, you know, and Forrest is still very, by virtue of his worldview, he's very self-focused, and he understands, he grasps what attaches itself to him, and so we get all these things dropping in and touching base, and we know the deeper meaning behind them. We understand what this signifies, but it's just this tiny little part of the story that goes on through, and then and there are other. It felt Oscar baity, but not as much as I expected it to, because they were so many of those things were so were not that relevant to the overall story being told. They were like silly little winks at the audience for sure, more than anything.
Well, obviously, I had the unpopular opinion in this one.
This is your Pulp Fiction.
Apparently. So, all your hate tweets to me. I will say, to clarify, I don't necessarily think that he and Jenny are a good relationship. I mean, I feel like, if anything, she got with him at the end because she knew she was dying, and he could probably take good care of her kid because, I'm just saying I loved the acting the most.
I can buy that.
I liked the storytelling, not necessarily the characters fitting.
That's fair.
It's more, I just liked, what this meant for him.
Yeah. It gave me a sense of dread. So we both related on different levels to that.
Sure. All right. Well, is there anything else that we want to talk about with this film before we move forward into the last bit? All right. So going into, we have talked about all of these films. It's taken a little bit longer than I was hoping, but that's all right. But we have talked about the first 5 out of our 15. What we're going to do at the end of this each time, I had all 3 of us came in basically ranking each one of these films. And based on those rankings, each film got points. It's the aggregate thing. So based on that, we are going to decide what our favorite and overall least favorite was out of those films. So out of our aggregate, the film that got the least number of votes was 4 Weddings and a Funeral. I mean, I think we all saw that coming. I think Hannah, you and I both put it in the 4 spot, and Jack put it as the last,
dead last.
And here's the thing:
it's all Andrew McDowell's fault.
I enjoyed this film, but you look at these 5, and it's like,
fit.
No, it really doesn't.
One
like
it
feels like the film that got a nod, not because it had any chance of winning, but because the people that watched it just liked it and wanted people to know about it.
This is the funeral among the 4 other weddings.
That's
what it is.
That's perfect.
Yeah. But I mean, it feels like, that spot that you give because, well, you got to nominate something else and you can't really think of anything else. So let's nominate this thing that I liked, but is not that great. It's just, I want people to know about it kind of thing.
I mean, nowadays movies are like that with the Oscars, except there's usually 4 more nominations that are like this.
Right. Right. Yeah. But yeah. And so I'm not necessarily going to go through all of them. But our number 1, the film that that all 3 of us thought was at least the best. At least the best. The least bad. Nobody hated was The Shawshank Redemption. Mm-hmm. Which honestly I think makes the most sense. I think it's one of the only ones that wasn't, I think the farthest down anybody put it was actually me. I put it in the middle. Mostly I went back and forth between this one and Quiz Show for my number 2 spot. I liked kind of the mystery aspect of Quiz Show a little bit more. And like I said, I feel like the crowd around this one hurts it a little bit in my head. But I like this movie. It's a good movie. So had we been in the Academy for 1994, the film that would have won was The Shawshank Redemption. I will say real quick, Jack, you actually picked Shawshank as your number 1. Anything else you want to say about why you picked that one?
No.
Okay. And Hannah, I think you've already
I've
talked
rambled
about
enough
this.
about it.
Yeah. But you actually picked Forrest Gump as your number one. Anything else you want to say as to why you did that?
No, defend yourself.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
No,
you like it? That's
I think
good.
I did.
That's
I did
fine.
like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, this was one of those things where, whenever it comes down to picking your favorite of movies, you have to decide, are you looking at what aspect are you looking at? And there's a question of, do you look at what film has the fewest problems? Or do you look at, and for me, I ended up landing on the film that I was the most rewatchability, the one that I was most engaged with throughout. And so I have no regrets there. I think either one of them could have taken my top spot, but I'm happy to give Forrest Gump a little extra love since Shawshank did so well overall.
All right. And my number one was actually Pulp Fiction. I went back and forth on it for a while.
I tanked that for you.
Oh, I did. I know you did. Because that was your five spot. But I think the reason I voted for Pulp Fiction is because of the lasting effect that it has had on film. It's just so influential, and it is one that I don't know. I always think I'm not gonna like it as much, and then I watch it and I'm like, no, it's really good. I like this movie.
And that influential thing is something that obviously in 1994 you could not have had the benefit of knowing when you're voting.
No, absolutely not.
I think it's very reasonable that folks were like, Pulp Fiction should have won that, but we really, that's something that you can only in hindsight look back at and be like, wow, this like the ripple effect from this was like way more than for Forrest Gump.
Yeah. But for this week, Shawshank Redemption wins the Golden Teddy. Just for the week. The Golden Teddy is the award that we will give to the number one picture for each week, but ultimately it will go to the number one film of 1994. It's our best picture. It's named after my dog. But yes. That is the show for today. Is there anything that any of you guys want to share, promote, mention before we close things out?
I'll go ahead and mention my podcast. I have a podcast which is creative brainstorming. We randomly generate a plot synopsis and then try to flesh it out into a real story. Clay has been on it. We ended up with a weird story about dodgeball playing ghosts, which was great fun. So check out somebody.
Ain't no rule says a ghost can't play dodgeball.
Exactly. And then if you like, if you want to hear more of my thoughts on movies, I actually have been uploading in 1 minute reviews of the things that I've been watching to TikTok. So you can follow me on there. Hannah Keefer 47. That's my very boring assigned to me by the app name. So if you want to see what I've been watching lately, I put reviews of all those up, so you can check that out there.
I like the little interviews you do on TikTok. Those are fun.
Yes, with the celebrities.
Yes. Yeah, those are great.
If you want to hear my voice with a lot fewer ums and ahs, I can be found on there's a Star Wars channel out there called Thor Skywalker, and he's putting out a Star Wars animated sequel trilogy of his own, and I am one of the voices in this series. Nice. Hasn't been released yet. The first episode hasn't come out yet, but the trailer has launched. So if you want to keep tabs on that, subscribe to his channel. He puts out good content, and that's it for me.
Yeah, and of course, I am the Flying Cow. You can get in contact with me at the Flying Cow Pod on Instagram and Twitter. You can also email me at theflyingcowpod@gmail.com. And as you know, we've got several different podcasts here. And if for some reason you've missed it, I also have the YouTube channel, The Flying Cow, on YouTube. We are doing movie battles over there. It is Disney Pixar animation trivia. Both of these two have competed. Both of these two have done very well in those games. So check those things out. I will say there is one thing I want to plug, because the moment that I actually had something to plug, I wasn't podcasting. And it's been a couple of weeks, but if you haven't already seen The Mitchells versus the Machines, it's on Netflix. It's so far my favorite film of the year. It is amazing and really good. You should check it out.
Can I plug a show?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I don't know how popular this show is, so I may just be about to put my foot up my mouth. But there is a show a friend of mine recommended me recently on Hulu called Pen 15, maybe also called Penis. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. I promise you, you will be happy. It is, if you don't know it, I'm serious. It's about two girls navigating through middle school in the early 2000s, and all the actors are age appropriate except for the two leads, who are played by 30-year-old women.
Okay.
The
sound...
acting, the writing, the comedy, it's wonderful.
That's been on my watch list for a long time. Right now, I'm making my way through all these other shows that are in my watch list, but that's in there as well for sure.
That sounds like the show that John Hodgman pitched on Dead Pilot Society.
Oh, I do remember that with the
that was like my favorite, where it was basically about his childhood, but he would have
played himself as an adult.
Himself,
yeah, as an adult playing his like an 11-year-old. Yeah,
I might have to check that out because I thought that concept was hilarious.
It's I cannot begin to describe how clever and talented these two women are, and to make a show like it pulls heartstrings. My partner and I watched the binge that I've caught up on the show in like the course of a week. It's like about a season and a half deep. So
yeah, the one show I always recommend to everybody, I'll toss it out here too. Watch Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. It's so good. It's the best.
I need to watch that. I've heard so many great things about it. I just
Rachel
haven't.
is queen.
Yeah. All right.
100%.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me. Thanks to everyone for listening. We will be back next week with 5 more films. Let me go ahead and let you guys know the next 5. We will be talking about Hoop Dreams, an entry in the 3 Colors trilogy, namely Red. We might talk about the whole thing. We'll just have to see. Hold on. Ooh, I reordered this. I think it's Ed Wood, the Chungking Express, and I think The Last Seduction.
I think so too. All I remember is
yeah,
the push.
I can always re-record this if I need to.
Yeah.
It's no big deal. But yeah, check us out for those discussions. And we will see you later. But as always, moo.